Hello everyone. Today we're going to work with Illustrator and tracing some images along with using some of the technology to help you trace. There's again multiple ways to do a number of different things. There's multiple ways to trace images, draw images. You should have a basic command on how to use the pen tool already, and that's going to come in handy either using the computer assist tracing or using a hand tracing process on your own. So the one thing that you can always do with Illustrator is that's very helpful for tracing images is to place an image that you want to trace from. So I'm going to go in here into Illustrator. I'm going to say File, Place, and then search your hard drive or your computer to where all your images would be that you want to use for this project. And I'm going to go here to my Illustrator file, and I have a couple images already here. And I have this one here. This is the tree image that we've been working on for part of the research. And this is a very large photographic image. Remember, it's a raster image, so it's all pixel based. You can see, the image. And you can also see the texture of the paper. If I zoom in real close here. You can also see, if you look real closely, you can see the other side of the page where I drew a tree and it's a little hard and the ink started kind of pouring through. This is one methodology. Using photographs is great, though what lacks in a lot of photograph is contrast. You can go into Photoshop and adjust the contrast and increase it for this purpose. The other option, which I strongly recommend, is actually taking a scan of your drawings or sketches or your starting points, because a scan is also an image, and I would save the image as a PDF so that way you can bring it in here, and you can turn any recording device you have into a scanner. You can just by downloading some software. Adobe makes an application called Adobe Scan, and it will scan documents, and it's great for copies. And if you don't need high resolution images, and you don't need all the information within the white page, because again, this image on the left is pretty large. A scan can just break it down to its basic components between black and white. I'm going to go again back to place, and I made a scan of this using Adobe Scan. And it's a little smaller, but that's okay. But it's a vector type based image, so I can enlarge it very easily, and bring it to about the same size. Whoops! I want to keep it in proportion, so that's why I'm holding down a Shift key while I'm moving the corners here. There we go. And I'm going to actually do it twice because I'm going to use 3 different ways that we can kind of work with this image. Whoops! I want to put that one over here on the other artboard here so I can work on it later. Actually, I'll start with this one here since we're already here. So I have an artboard here. There's my third one. And I want to use, again, the scan, and I want to create a layer. Again, having layers is a great way to organize your work, especially when it starts becoming very complex with lots of different little parts, as it happens with Illustrator very often. The bottom layer, I can turn on and off, and it affects all the artboards. If you're looking, it'll do all the artboards. I can also lock the layer, so I can't do anything to the object on that layer. And it's a great way to kind of just have that there, and then I can go on to the layer that's on top of it and begin to trace. I'm of the nature of tracing by hand because this is the way I was taught, because before there were all these fancy tools, we did everything by hand. So I can come in here and drop a point here. Maybe I'll drop a point here. Oops. Let me back up real quick. I need to define my line, my edge, or my stroke, so that way you can see it drawn at the same time. I'm going to change the stroke to red just so you can see my actions that's happening as I go along here. so here I got my pen tool. It's got a red stroke on it, and you're going to see me just kind of go around real quickly. And again, I generally make the general shape using just straight lines. And in this case, I'm going to make it separate. And I'm just going to do the tree, not the trunk yet. I'll do the trunk later on a separate layer. So now I have my general idea. I can shift over to my the other part of the pen tool, which is the anchor point tool, and I can come back here and I can grab these points and just kind of move it along and pull it out so I get my circular part of the tree. I'm just going to do a real rough cut so we can move on with the demonstration here. So here's my circular part of the tree. Of course, I can always change the shade or the fill to be a tree color. And now I have, my tree there. And then I can draw the trunk separately, and I would probably do that on a separate layer again, because again, having different layers helps organize things. And this time I'm going to go ahead and predefine my trunk to be brown and my stroke to be black, and then come in here and just kind of pick up a path. I want to start the path down here. And again, I'll just do it as a general straight lines, and then I'll fill in or pull the curves later. So I'll probably just move this a little bit up here like that so it kind of falls right there. And when I take away the image layer that I traced over, I have the elements of the tree. Now I can switch this up around by taking the tree trunk and put it behind the tree, so that way it just has this nice clean break line there. Or I can leave it in, move the layer back up to the top to where you can see that the line's still apparent, and that's a little off kilter, but I think that's okay. And then from here, I would just further refine the tree and make it look more, symmetrical perhaps, or a little bit more even in shape or size, things like that. And that's the hand tracing method. Illustrator has a number of tools in here that makes it a little bit easier for tracing, called image trace, and it does a decent job. But having practiced this so long with just using the hand drawing method, it to me it's easier. But the image trace can make things easier, but also makes things a little bit more complex on the other side. And I'll show you what I mean by that. So for instance, I have this image here. I'll use the scan first. Oops, I need to unlock that so I can grab it. And all this work will be done on one layer. If I highlight the image, if you look at the control bar, there's a number of things that you can do with an image. It's a link file, so it knows the path of where the object lives in your hard drive. And there's a couple of things here. Embed, there may be an instance where you have to embed the file or put the file actually inside the Illustrator work document. I don't necessarily find it useful most of the time, because what happens when you embed the file, the weight or the size of the file comes into Illustrator, so that file becomes much bigger. And Illustrator files run on a very small amount of memory space because it's a vector-based file, so it doesn't need to have all the pixels in there. So embedding an image sometimes will increase your file size, which ultimately decreases your speed of operations. But in this case, you can also quick click it for edit original to go to Photoshop, but in this case I'm going to use image trace. So you can pull down the menu here. Whoops. Sorry, let me back up here real quick. You can pull down the menu here. There's some preset options on how to do image tracing, but ultimately what I like to do is have a little bit more control. So I'll click image trace. You'll see that the image goes through a process. You see some of the lines kind of get scattered there. It's not fully complete because it's reading whatever pixel's there. So what I'd like to go do is come in here and go to the image trace window. That pulls up all the components and control bars that you can have with image trace. In this case, I generally do black and white since I'm doing a lot of illustrations. I want to see the tracing results, of course. The threshold is about the sensitivity of how much you can pick up from an image. And by increasing it a little bit more, you see that the line becomes a little bit more filled out, especially in this area where the pen kind of skipped a little bit. And if you decrease it, then it's less sensitive, and then it doesn't pick up all the lines, and you can see where it kind of loses some parts. And once you get to to about the right position, we'll take the next step here, and I want to make sure that the lines are nice and tight and clean. There's some leftover artifacts here, which we can take care of later. Here's other ways that you can control the more advanced features of it. It can have the path to be a much higher degree of path. This is what you're looking at as a path, or a lower degree. It can also round out corners a little bit more, but everything's kind of curved here. I want to leave it about 50%. And the noise comes in handy when you're actually using a photograph that has a lot of detail of how much it can pick up, or how much the AI can discern between certain different parts of the pixel. But for this case, I'm just going to leave it right here. And once I get to this, to where it looks like it's pretty refined, I'm going to expand it. So you're going to make it and then expand it. So expanding it, once you expand it, you don't see a lot of changes until you grab your direct selection tool, and now everything's a path. And that path you can control. Now if you look here real closely, you have a path with a whole bunch of anchor points. And that means, so you can see that the line is not a very smooth curve, and that's because there's an anchor point for every single little crooked angle that your pen may have drawn. If you want to smooth that out, then either you have to do one of two things. You have to individually control each anchor point, and there's a lot of anchor points, or delete some of the anchor points so you have less anchor points to control, but then you have to go back and individually control each anchor point. So it becomes a little bit more complex in this manner. No method is right or wrong, but there's some that works better than others. What also this does is that there's actually multiple paths here, because there's one on the outside and one on the inside. I'll kind of zoom in so you can see it here. You can see that the path here is for the inside, and then there's one for the outside. So it kind of, depending on which one you're working on, it can be very confusing after a while. Sometimes what I like to do in this case, which is also very handy, is to use the merge feature on the Pathfinder. So it kind of merges all the paths together, and then I basically unite all the paths to be one. It makes it a lot easier to control. I'll zoom in here again. And from there, you should have most of your controls, such as the fill and your stroke. And the stroke's already automatically black, but you'll have it there, and then you can change all those little parts, and then you can and then there is the separation between the shape. And this is where I would take this vector image, or vector image of from the scan, the copy, and put it on a different layer, so that way I can work on it separately. That's one methodology using the scan. I recommend, if you're going to scan something, use a PDF of an image or a sketch rather than the photograph. And I want to show you what happens with the photograph. So again, here's the It's an image capture from a handheld device. Pretty decent, but again, you don't have contrast because this white paper is actually kind of mottled gray. I can go through here, do the image trace again, go through that same process. It takes a moment. You can see that it converts everything to a black and white scale. But what you have here is this information over here. If I were to take the threshold and move it up and down, you see the information might go away, but also some of the details of the tree might go away. I'm going to increase the sensitivity of that. And what's happening is that with the image, Illustrator is reading the image in all parts of the image, in all the white parts. And the white parts is technically really grayscale, and it's not a very clean grayscale. If I were to expand this, I want to show you what happens, is that you not only have the tree and the anchor points, but you also have the shadow or any sort of artifacts on the page as part of the image or the outline. Now you can also, ultimately what happens is that if you went ahead and used this, you would have to actually delete all the parts that are that are not, you don't need or associated with the image, and that becomes a very tedious task to go through all those parts. Here it went pretty quickly, but again, you can see there's leftover parts all right in here, and so you'd have to come through and grab them all and select them, and it becomes a little messy at times. There's this one part here that kind of also got pulled over, and I can come over back to the original, and that part right there is still there, and I can come in there and individually grab it and again delete it, and because it's not really part of the image I want. It takes a lot of cleanup work in the end, even though Illustrator traced it for you. So there's there's three different ways to kind of draw different parts here, and if you want to change the trunk, you would have to separate that and break that apart. So make a copy, take apart what you don't need, delete it, and you're left with what you need to work with, which is the trunk. And then again, it's two separate parts. So there is again, three different ways that you can either trace an image by hand or use the AI information within Illustrator to kind of read the image and trace it. The image traces also works very handy with photographs, more complex photographs, but then remember, anything that's more complex in a photograph, there's going to be a whole bunch of extra little parts, and everything's going to be its own little segment of things, and you'll see a whole bunch of anchor points. So a lot of times, I'll try to find good photographs that have more negative space and less in the background, so that way it's easier to remove all those extraneous parts you don't really need. If you have any questions, let me know. Thanks.